Our next panel tackles a topic that's increasingly at the heart of public debate. Should we limit social media for under-16s? As governments around the world consider age restrictions, digital identity systems and tighter controls on online platforms, we're faced with a very complex challenge. How do we protect young people online without compromising the freedoms and privacy of all users? To help us navigate this terrain, we're joined by three leading voices in New Zealand's digital, economic and civil liberties landscape. First, we welcome Andrew Cushion. Hello, Andrew. Executive Director of the Code for Online Safety and Harm, and former interim CEO of Internet NZ. Andrew has been at the forefront of efforts to create safer online environments whilst defending the open nature of the internet. Next, we have Dr. Eric Crampton. Thank you for that wave, Dr. Eric Crampton, Chief Economist at the New Zealand Initiative. Eric brings a sharp economic lens to this debate, having raised critical concerns about the unintended consequences of social media age bans and digital ID mandates. Joining them is Annie O'Brien. Hello, Annie. Yes, thank you. A digital strategist, women's rights advocate, and founding council member of the Free Speech Union. Annie is a very active social media personality in New Zealand and brings unique experience to this discussion. And once again, guiding us through this important conversation is our moderator, Chris Lynch. This promises to be a very lively and thought-provoking session. Please join me in welcoming our panellists and moderator to the stage. Thank you.
Hi everyone, let's get straight to it. So Annie, I know you've got a slightly different position here. You are sort of representing other people. So for the benefits of the background, explain exactly the position you're talking about today.
So if you are signed up to our email database, you may have received an email from me this week where I explained that I was struggling to find where to position myself in this debate, because I do understand the very real, to use the H word, harms that children are being exposed to on the internet. To be honest, anyone who's on the internet has probably experienced some pretty horrible things, because it can be a horrible place. However, being on the Free Speech Union, I'm also very worried about the solutions being proffered. We initially reached out to an organisation called B416. They're a group of highly accomplished mums who are worried about this, and they have advocated for the law change that we are talking about today. I met with them along with Jelaine this week, and they are incredibly passionate and well-intentioned, and I agreed with lots of what they said. And so I'm going to proffer some of their arguments, just to make this a little bit interesting so that I'm not just agreeing with the guys over here. I think that on the whole, we'll find that we can agree on the harm, we're just not agreeing on the solution. That's basically how I see it.
I want to start with something that was quite compelling that I reported on earlier this week, and it was the sad case of a young teenager based in Marlborough who sadly took her own life because she didn't have the expertise or the psychiatric support that she needed to. And this actually all stemmed from the fact that she was going online about the age of 10 years of age and speaking to very highly sexualised men who in the end took advantage of her. And she was seeing things that no young person, in fact even adult, should see. So I thought, wow, when I read the coroner's report on this, obviously some of it suppressed, it was really compelling, and it did make me think, oh, okay, maybe banning 16-year-olds from not just social media, but heaven forbid the internet, not actually a bad thing. Do you know the story I'm talking about?
I hadn't heard it, but I've heard many like it.
Yeah. What is your take on that when you hear stories of, young women, particularly young women who may have inadvertently come across deviant men that have taken advantage of them and they are underage, and this all plays out from the likes of social media? How would you react to this proposed legislation with these types of situations that appear to be happening more common than I even want to think about?
As I initially said, I think we can agree that these situations are unacceptable. We don't want our children to be exposed to predators and to the kind of content that they regularly are. The problem is devising the solution that protects them without undermining our own freedoms. So when I hear about cases like that, I think we are in deficit as adults. We are allowing children to be exposed to this thing, but we need to figure out how we protect them without undermining all the freedoms that allow us to go online, speak our minds, and interact with each other. And that's the challenge, really. I think with this particular law, I don't know that we can call it a law because it's so vague and so open-ended. The solution is not profit. there will be a solution. It might be like the Australian one, it might be like the British one. We don't really know, so it's hard to argue against. However, what I heard from our members when I got the responses to my email last week was that a lot of you are worried about this being a slippery slope into digital ID. And I think that is worth us exploring and making sure that we protect against. I think in the process, we can also turn our minds to what can we do instead.
Andrew, I want to come to you on this. It seems really bizarre that Australia have already passed this law, but it seems like they're kind of making it up as they go. They haven't really worked out what they're going to be able to achieve with these tech companies. So no doubt that Kiwi policymakers here are looking at this very closely and watching. I mean, I was surprised to hear the Australian Prime Minister almost concede defeat in a way, saying, I'm not quite sure how it's going to work, we're just going to hope that Meta behaves. What do you say about all this?
Well, thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew, and I am, for part of my time, the Executive Director for the Aotearoa New Zealand Code of Practice for Online Safety and Harms, which we often just call the code for the reason that you've just seen step out of me running out of breath. An important caveat before I answer you, I'm not speaking for the code up here today. This is probably an audience where I don't have to worry about you all trying to de-platform me for the things that I say here today. But these are the opinions of Andrew Cushing, private citizen, not in the role that I have with the code. Now to answer your question. Yeah, so the Australians are doing the latest in a version of a grand experiment about how we regulate the internet. This is the latest version of about the last 15 years at least of policy experiments from a wide range of jurisdictions. They're all trying to solve actually really noble problems, actually really hard problems that I will intensely disagree with any of you if you think that they don't exist, right? And we can have that debate either here or elsewhere, but that there are harms online, I think, is a relatively uncontroversial subject. Now, how you define them is a really different question, right? But there are responses to that challenge as well in a variety of legal, legislative, regulatory, academic ways that you can choose to pick. But it's also a dead-end conversation, I think, to start talking about the definitional basis that you want to go on. So today, to accept that harms exist is important. To look around, particularly the Western world, to see that any number of societies have been trying to find a way to curb those harms has been a continual, almost legislative regulatory experiment over that period. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that none of those ideas have actually really worked. And so I don't think the Australian one is going to work either. And I could run through some of the history, but I'd talk too much in terms of how there's been a wide range of failed ideas here too. I don't think Australia have cracked this. I think they've kicked so many of the important details to touch for the e-safety commissioner to work out vaguely later, but by that point they would have already legislated and will be burdened with it on their books.
Very weird predicament to be in, legislating against something where they're not quite sure how it's going to end up. But anyway, Eric, you've got a slightly different take on this. You believe that such restrictions threaten free expression rather than protect children. Is that your take on things?
Yeah, so that's the right question. So this is the Free Speech Union, not the Civil Liberties more broadly union, and there can be other organizations for that. I don't think that it is inherent that this turns into a free speech issue for adults. It's technologically contingent. It is inherently a free speech issue as it pertains to children, and we can argue and discuss some of the merits on that side. When it comes to adults, if you can imagine a world where God sees all and tells the tech platform or the social media platform that the current user is in fact over or under the age limit and reveals nothing else about that person to the platform, there wouldn't really be a free speech issue at all. Somehow, hand of God comes in, keeps the kids off social media, and we can debate the pluses and minuses of that for kids because there are also some minuses, but for adults we wouldn't have to worry about it. With tech as it currently exists, I think that there is a trilemma that any operational system will be forced to balance three things that kind of suck, and I expect that Australia's will suffer from all of them to some extent, And I think that it is insane that New Zealand is considering following them before seeing whether Eric's wrong, right? We want to find out whether there is actually a way of doing this without causing harms to speech. So why do I see there as being harms to speech? Any system is going to require that you prove that you're an adult, right? So some ways of doing that would have the platform making its best guess, and maybe it can triage some people out like that. So I've had an account with Twitter since 2009. I'm unlikely to be under the age of 16. It could notice that. Well, maybe I've actually handed my account over to a kid. I can't guarantee, but it could notice that and make its best guesses. There are always going to be some people that are right at the edge. So I think in Australia, UK, they're looking at if you're under 25, then it'll have to do a challenge. And the better that it is at guaranteeing that no kids get on, the worse it will be at identifying people who are over the age limit, right? There is a sensitivity specificity issue. If it's really good at making sure there are no kids on, it will always be over-identifying some adults as being kids who then get challenged to prove that they're not actually underage. There are two ways through on that. One is really a hassle ongoing for adult users to keep proving that they're adults, and the other one is the end of privacy. So as soon as you start having to hand over your ID so it knows who you actually are, a host of potential harms can happen. We can look at the UK where Discord has everybody's IDs, 90,000 of those got breached, and oops, imagine if you were a Chinese student studying at Cambridge and you were active on Discord servers talking about problems and civil liberties in China. Uh-oh, your actual ID has now been hacked, linked to your account so everybody knows who you actually were. Pseudonymity is an important protection for freedom of speech, and that is gone under this kind of legislation.
Andrew, it does raise the important question, I suppose, of ID or digital ID creep, doesn't it? And with the examples now with Britain trying to roll out a so-called Brit card and all the other messages that potentially go with that, all the current concerns, whether or not you'll be able to go down the motorway only once because you've pleaded too much with your carbon for the day. Do you see those types of conversations and part of this as hysteria, or do you think they're genuine concerns?
Well, the tricky bit of that is trying to answer it somewhat efficiently. Okay, so yes, broadly to parts of that, and no, broadly to other parts of that. And what do I mean by that? Because essentially, you find proponents and advocates of free speech are kind of living in a utopia right now for your values, and you have been for the last somewhere between 15 and 30 years. Why? Because you've had the mass emergence of a technology and platforms built off that technology in the internet that allows you to broadcast anything you want on a wide variety of platforms to literally millions, if not billions of people, depending on your popularity, which is a wholly different unregulatory challenge, right? You know how to do that, yeah? And work a bit of popularity to get some eyeballs on what you're thinking there too. Wonderful market mechanisms and all that jazz where you have had nearly untrammeled access to the ability to speak freely, right? And so do I think that some of this is a change to that current default? Yeah, I think it is, because in many media theorists' mind, this is actually a utopia for a whole pile of democratic thinking and challenging ideas and the marketplace of democracy and all that other jazz. A lot of the research shows that in actual fact it's not many of those things, that instead we have a lot more polarization, a lot more radicalization, a lot more intensive behaviors, a lot more abhorrent content that is reaching more people here. And so answering that question kind of requires us to balance what having that untrammeled access to speech actually means and whether it's actually a good thing versus the idealized perfect world that we have at the moment. I've almost lost track of your question as I go on this rant, but I'm still going to keep going very briefly. And I think too that part of the challenge with this, and the UK's been on this bandwagon for a while here, is trying to associate actually identity with idea really clearly. That free speech angle and foundation of the internet and of these social media platforms has inherently been a threat to, broadly speaking, order and to aggregation of unwise ideas and philosophies, etc., for some time. And the UK has been at the forefront of trying to rein that in a really awkward manner, bluntly, in terms of challenging encryption, in terms of challenging the ability to remain anonymous, in terms of digital ideas and the likes too. It's such a shame, given the pedigree that the Brits come from in terms of some of these things, that they're at the forefront of hampering so many of them too. I'm going to try and wrap this up, this at least rant up at this particular point. You can't really have both, as Eric has already said, right? This conversation is present and has been present for the last 15 years. You all can't have untrammeled access to the ability to share your ideas, and collectively, we as humanity can't have the ability to have billions of pieces of content created daily without arising these questions as to whether or not everybody is using it sensibly and what we do about that. I don't know what we do about that. I'm not going to sit up here today and pretend that I do. That's why there's all of these experiments about how to do it. But I'd also challenge all of you that you can't stand back and say that these questions and these experiments aren't valid, actually, even though we may not particularly know the answers. And I also don't think, and this is me trying to be deliberately provocative, you can stand back and say that free speech alone is an unchallengeable good thing that none of those other ideas can stand in the way of, even if you don't know the solution as to how to balance them. And if you can go that far with me, then you're entering in the space of don't know what to do about it, but it's really fascinating to talk about.
Eric, to you, then the conversation then leads to me to ask the question, then who should police the internet? Is it government's responsibility? Is it the social media responsibility? Is it parents? Is it all the above, or is it none of the above?
Okay, well, if we're sticking with for those under 16, which was the starting remit, I'll stick there for first,
Sure.
then maybe we can expand more broadly. The submission that we put in on the legislation, and I think our solution, the solution that I put up sucks, but I think it sucks less than most of the other ones. How many people here have ever heard of Google Family Link? Okay, maybe 10% of you. All right. There are already ways that parents can monitor and regulate their kids' use of their phones. On Google Family Link, I have my daughter, we're an Android family, or at least we were until a 17-year-old under his job, bought himself an iPhone and got himself out from under it, but it's fine, he's 17. If he can make enough money to buy an iPhone, then I think he's earned his freedom. On Google Family Link, you can set it that your kids cannot install apps without your authorization, and then you get a little notification asking whether they're allowed to install the thing or not. You can set time limits, not just the number of hours per day, but also a bedtime, saying, oh, the phone stops working after a certain time, and it only starts working again at a certain time in the morning. You can set time limits on specific apps, app by app. If you think that it's important for your kid to be able to maintain some connections with some of their friends on Instagram, as is very important for my daughter, you give her enough time on there to do that, but not enough time to get up to nonsense, right? And you can always keep an eye on how your kid's doing and throttle things back or ease things up as seems to best suit you as a parent who knows better your kids than any government official ever will. If we were in a world where the harms from social media were very large and uniform across all kids, then I think it could be sensible to start talking about broader bans and weighing that up against the cost that it might impose on adults. I don't think we're in that world. I'm expecting that a lot of you would have already read Jonathan Haidt, who is very convinced about the very strong harms to a lot of kids. He is not the only person who writes in this space. There are others. I'm happy to share links. Kathy Odgers is another one. Other academics in this space have found instead that the harms are highly variable. They are real. Some experience very real bad harms, but on average, they're much smaller and more variable. When they are variable, you can't have a one-size-fits-all solution. It has to go down to the people who know best what the actual circumstances are. And to me, that is the parents. So that comes to the solution that we'd put up in our submission. We suggested that Parliament, instead of doing all this other stuff, could just set a default in the App Store or require that there be a default in the App Store when you download an app that's designated that you just need parental authorization. Now, I don't like that solution for a lot of reasons, but I think it sucks less than others. We get into some weirdness where it is legal currently for your kid to go in with a medical specialist and get all kinds of prescriptions without ever telling you, but you'd have to go to the parents to be able to just read information. Imagine like a kid in Gloriavale who wants to learn about the outside world but needs their parents' permission. That starts bothering me. I think there are real trade-offs in that, but people can come to different views on it. I think the solution we have isn't great, but if we're determined to do something, I think it's the least bad something.
Thank you. Andy, then why aren't we talking more about parental control or the fact that there is this digital family link? That seems to be missing from the conversation. It seems to be missing also from the National MP's bill on this.
On the board, that was overwhelmingly, on the Free Speech Union board, that was the common trend among members, was it needs to be a parental issue. I will just say that B416 said to me that they have concerns that those parental app programs can be easily got around. I guess I would say that you probably could fairly respond to that by pointing out that kids can get around pretty much every rule that we put in place for them, and we either worry about that or we don't. We ban alcohol for under 18s, and many of them will still drink it. It's whether or not banning social media for them is as beneficial as what we do with tobacco and gambling and alcohol. I think there is a real risk of the state overreaching here, and I think it is right to put these things on parents. Unfortunately, what I think we need to also appreciate as people who tend to see the world in terms of rights and freedoms, that's what we talk about a lot. The reality is that a lot of New Zealanders don't. And a lot of them are quite happy to say, give me another rule to abide by, it will make me feel safer. And we saw that in COVID. And I think if we look at the situation right now, Labor and National have both indicated that they're quite in favour, well, National obviously it's their bill, but Labor has given some indication that they are in favour of it as well, whether it's this particular vague iteration. And I think that leaves us in a situation where, as Eric said, he's proffered an option that he's not entirely happy with, but it's the less worse option. And I wonder if we're all in that situation with this, because if we have a big purple coalition that passes this bill, we'll have it. So how do we go about improving it and mitigating and, at select committee stage, saying to the government, these are the real concerns we have, how about we improve this bill that you're going to pass?
Or just delay it.
Delaying it, that would be a good argument to make. I just am not, the risk of sounding like Stephen Franks in the last panel, I'm not hopeful that Labor and National will listen too much on this one. I think they have seen the attraction of the number of people saying, I want safety, I want rules, and they're enticed by that kind of power, I guess, as any government is, as any political party is. So I think we all need to ask the question, how do we best fight the damage of this? Do we fight it by fire and brimstone and bringing, all the anger down on them, in which case they go, thanks very much, we're passing it? Or do we all show up at select committee and really mitigate against some of the worst parts of it?
Andrew, do children themselves have the right to free expression online, or does that right reasonably begin at adulthood? What's your views on that?
Sorry, that's a tricky one. That was my reaction. Look, I don't know. I think that age-based, I did warn you all that this is Andrew Cushing, private citizen, so I can be as unhinged as I like, really, that any age-based mechanisms is a proxy for cognitive ability in the first place, right? And so here we are saying that a way of characterising this under-16 debate is actually an acknowledgement that there is a whole pile of harmful crap all over social media, but arbitrarily will say that you can't handle that if you're under 16, and you can absolutely handle that so long as you're over 16. And I don't really buy that argument as well. I've met plenty of incapable adults, and I've met plenty of very capable 14 and 15-year-olds that can handle that traffic to differing degrees. So, no, I actually don't think this is a free speech argument based on age myself as to whether or not you assign rights at different age brackets, so to speak, even though we do so all the time for practical, probably administrative reasons. I don't want to add something to the earlier points though too, sorry, if I keep on rolling on. I also want to challenge you all as well not to delude yourselves that you're not already in a regulated environment on the internet and on these platforms too. Because I bet my bottom dollar that none of you spend I think 48 hours at last count reading every word of Facebook's terms and conditions as you sign up. Or I think Instagram is up to about 6 or 7 days if you use the average adult reading speed across the Western world to read those things. All of those are regulatory instruments that you are signing up to that, if I was to be super provocative, were designed in Silicon Valley by middle-aged white rich dudes who wanted to make money off you as their primary regulatory objective, right? Now, we have to add that to this landscape here too, that there is a spectrum of ways of solving this problem, that the platforms themselves have got some solutions in place that have just not been designed with regard to any democratic value whatsoever, and instead been designed arguably for their shareholder interest. Have I got you? I've got you.
Go for it.
on. There we go. I wanted to get there somehow.
Eric, did you want to respond to that? Go for it.
Sure. I'd argue to the contrary. Okay, what's more democratic? The government sets one rule that all of the platforms have to follow, no matter what you think makes sense for you and your family, or you, with your kids, get to decide which platforms best suit your kids as you understand them and turn off the ones that don't. I think the latter is a hell of a lot more democratic than the former.
Values as a market mechanism. I can buy that. Let's all read the terms and conditions and make informed
But you don't even
choices
have to.
about
you
which
see the
one.
experience.
Yes. Thank you. I'm glad we got here.
Eric, what do you see the end game being for the likes of Australia at the moment? And this, I think this legislation or the policy is going to be fixed before Christmas in whatever form, I have no idea. Do you think once kids do have to put in their driver license or take photos of themselves to make sure that the algorithm can identify them as being 16 or under, do you think this is the start of something more sinister, as I imagine people in the audience here are most concerned about, or what?
All right, well, we can make projections about what happens in Australia. We can look at what has happened in the UK. So in the UK, it's a very different kind of regime, and it's the kind that, okay, Annie had previously said that Labour and National both want to do this stuff. Labour wants to follow the UK. That's their members' bill that's in the tin, and National wants to follow Australia, and that's their members' bill that's been pulled out of the tin. And hopefully they just fight about it with each other, and we do neither. But in the UK, what happened is instead of it age-gating social media, it was age-gating access to anything that might be possibly harmful for a youth. All right? So that meant that all of a sudden, I think it was in July, everybody in the UK trying to access Facebook pages or Discord or all kinds of websites that some bureaucrat might think is risky, or that the website itself, terrified of being sued and subject to massive penalties from the British government, said, all right, if you're from the UK, you're going to have to identify yourself to us and give us your ID. And a pile of people did, and then it starts getting hacked. And fun fact, pornography is regulated there too as something potentially harmful. You've got to take a selfie before you go looking at your favorite porn site so that it can guess from the picture of your face how old you are. And it'll be really fun if that database ever gets hacked in New Zealand so we can see which MPs like which sorts of things. It'll be wonderful, and I hope that they get to experience it. Now, one of the responses to this in the UK was that everybody went to get a VPN. So hourly downloads went up like 1,800% for one of the more popular VPNs, Proton VPN, immediately after everybody started getting this challenge. Like, okay, most people pay no attention to it until it hits them in the face. Having to take a picture of your face, that's hitting you in the face. They go in and download a VPN. The British government started talking about ways of limiting VPN access or trying to ban them. And I am reliably informed that the Select Committee looking into harms for youths has been wondering whether it is possible to ban VPNs in New Zealand as well. Now, hopefully we don't go down those paths. Australia, well, we're going to see what happens there, because kids will have workarounds. One of the workarounds is using a VPN to pretend that you're not in the regulated regime. The state that likes to enforce things might decide to go after VPNs after that. One consequence is that I have bought a long-term subscription to my preferred VPN, because the obvious route for the state is to try and ban payments to the VPNs. It's harder to do that if you've got a multi-year subscription. I think that the best route for the Free Speech Union is urging Parliament to wait to see if anybody else in the world figures this stuff out in ways that aren't awful. Because I can see all kinds of awful outcomes. I'm expecting bad outcomes in Australia, but I could be wrong. If I'm wrong and they come up with something that actually works and doesn't hurt adults, well, fine, we can talk about that. We'll know in a year. We've had social media and kids for like a decade. We can wait a year. It's fine.
And could a ban like this, though, lead to digital identification systems or prevent people from having their say anonymously? And is that necessarily a bad thing, giving the state power to remove people from the internet altogether?
That is a very bad thing. And if I didn't say that being a member of the Free Speech Union, I think you'd be very worried. I have, as I said in the survey that we sent out last week, overwhelmingly the response to the concerns about under-16 social media ban was the fact that it's a stepping stone or a slippery slope into a digital ID system. As the guys have said, if we copy the Australian way, that necessitates a verification of ID. There's no way that they say, okay, we'll put your ID in and then it'll disappear and we won't look at it again. None of us believe that is the case, and so it inevitably raises the case that our speech gets attached to our real life ID. Now, some people will say that's a good thing. Some people will say if it's attached to your ID, then maybe you won't be such an asshole on the internet. I mean, maybe, but it also comes with trade-offs, and that's what we're talking about today, is a whole bunch of trade-offs. It's safety versus freedom. It's the classic situation, again, reflecting on COVID, safety, freedom. So where do we land? Well, that's the hard question. And I think as a free speech union, our purpose is to protect this particular freedom. And so that'll be our focus. But I think as a society, there's a lot of questions that we all need to consider.
Andrew, how do we address the real dangers of social media, addiction, bullying, manipulation, without creating new forms of control or surveillance?
Oh, another massive one.
It's exhausting.
Most of these behaviours aren't actually online behaviours at all. They're just behaviours that have moved online and therefore gained a different method of transmission, a different sort of pervasiveness and continuity and all of those other bad things. I mean, we all know this, right? I mean, I was bullied long before social media came along. This isn't a cry for help, by the way. Just like people have been saying horrible things to each other for centuries, millennia, way before they had Facebook to do it more directly, right? And so at one level, this is going to sound super fatalistic, right? We've never managed to stop people being horrendous dicks through any other medium. We're probably not going to be able to stop it via social media either. There is, instead, what we're talking about, I think, is what your societal norms are and how you enforce societal norms of conduct and good personhood across a society or people in all of those soft sort of ways. And that's almost certainly not through legislation, has never been through legislation as a way of dictating a value set. It is probably in households, which is where your suggestion was so good, that the most important place often to instill values and then modify your technology to abide by those values is inside your home, where you have nearly complete control of being able to do that. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. I think I could keep going, Paige.
Should we go to the audience now? Questions? Yes.
My name is Robert Biggs. Look, the state already intervenes and doesn't require parental control for going to school. You're meant to go to school or have an education. You cannot purchase alcohol under the age of 18. You can drink it. You can't purchase it. You can't drive a car. You can't have a gun license, and you can't vote. Now, in Australia, my understanding is that the government there is going to put huge fines on social media companies who don't have adequate age controls. Well, let's see what they do. The companies are so big, they're so wealthy, they make their money out of advertisements. And the advertisements have driven away the press and freedom of speech to some extent. So there's no rush. We should wait and see what the Australians do. What does the panel think about this?
Eric, do you want to answer?
I agree with you that we should wait and see how things turn out in Australia. What worries me, I often hear the comparison to alcohol. Now let's think about it. You or I walk into a bar and the bartender just sees us and doesn't bother asking for our ID because obviously neither of us is under 18. It is legal for me to give my kid a drink, even my 15-year-old, right? That's all legal. Under the legislation from Australia, if they don't do a good enough job in figuring out who is under the age limit, they will be subject to massive fines. That will mean, it's not like somebody's walking into a bar and presenting themselves to the social media company, right? They can't just look at you and tell, and then if it's a challenge, have a quick look at your ID and then forget it because they don't care what your name is. They're going to have like audit records to make sure that they're doing a good enough job, right? You have to prove that you've done a good enough job and with your due diligence. Now, there are tech ways of trying to solve this that actually are anonymity preserving. Those ones wind up being really burdensome for adults. It's like having to show your ID all the time, but knowing that it'll forget it. I don't think it's going to work out very well. The protection of the age gating for kids is just systematically different because of how there are records that get maintained on what adults are doing.
Can I add something to that
Sure.
very quickly too? We have to be really mindful here in New Zealand that we're going to copy someone on this. Why? Because we don't have any market power or regulatory power in order to actually impose a New Zealand-led solution on this particular set of problems. So if we're not going to copy the Australian answer in order to leverage their market power to force the solution on those social media platforms, then we'll look to the UK or maybe the EU or never the States because they never get there. We're going to look to someone.
China.
Sorry, thank you. Maybe China, right? So we are going to import somebody's value set if we do this. We are going to have to because we don't have a legislative power here versus our market scale.
Thank you. Another question?
I'm going to choose to be the contrarian. The polling on this is that banning social media for under-16s is more popular than I suspect most of the people in the room would want.
I'm sure it is.
And that for many of those, many parents that might otherwise argue that things should be up to the parents could say it's bloody hard to ban your 12-year-old daughter from social media when all the other parents aren't doing the same thing. Annie asked you, Eric, what features we assuming this is going to pass, we should be pushing for to make it less bad. The great line about the social media, about the UK and the IDs, with respect, that's a bit of a red herring here. Instagram is not porn, it's not blackmailable, and there's plenty of technologies that allow age verification as a third party. So I come back to, what are from the Free Speech Union's point of view, if we can't defeat it, what features should we be pushing for to make it less bad?
Annie, do you want to answer that first and Eric can have a go?
It's always awkward answering a question from your boss, but there are a variety of options we can look at to make it less bad, but it depends on what parts you think are bad, obviously. So we've talked about there's biometrics as one option. That doesn't require you to provide an ID, but it does require you to scan your face. So is that less bad than ID? Some people would say yes. But again, it's the porn thing. You take a picture of your face and all of that. That Jordan disagrees with. Another kind of wild idea that I've had, which is not particularly a free speech one. So I'm going to do what Andrew did and say this is an Annie idea, not a free speech union one. I've thought about, how about if instead of creating a ban on software, we ban the hardware? So we say that children under 16 cannot own or purchase a smartphone, and we decide what to do with perhaps devices in schools. And that way they can have a brick, so they can talk to their friends via text, they can contact their parents, but they cannot use apps, and they can't do any of the other things on social media. That is one idea I have, and I know that Mr. Freedom over here won't like it. But I personally think that it is one we can control better because it's a purchase thing, right? Like alcohol. And it doesn't mean that we have to limit the freedoms of adults. Just throwing it out there.
With the good old days of the brick phones, and the reception was so clear. God bless you. Eric, do you want to respond? Sure.
I think the first response should be, let's just wait a year to see how the chips catch up in Australia. Maybe Eric is wrong. Maybe they do find a way. And if they do, great. We can look at that. They won't. All right. The other one would be, let's not do the Australian version, but instead require that the designated apps have the default that you have to have parental authorization in either the Apple equivalent of Google Family Link or in Google's. That version at least preserves parental autonomy. So it is legal for me to give my kid a drink if I think that that's suitable. It should be legal for me to let my kid use social media. And I guess one potential advantage of that is that it would force those parents to at least think about Google Family Link or those parental control apps. I think that should absolutely be coupled with an awful lot of education on how these work. It was a little depressing how few hands went up. Like I can go on right now and see how much time my daughter has spent on social media, on her phone at all today, and on whichever social media apps in particular. I find that important. And one risk with brick phone only, that can also be a way of limiting kids' freedom, right? So I was much happier to have my kids running all over town on Wellington's buses because I could tell where they were on Google Maps, their Google Family Link. They got an expansion in freedom because it was safer. And if they managed to get themselves lost and take the wrong bus, they could sort themselves out because they had the map right there, right? You can't do that with the brick.
Trade-offs, right?
And at the same time, every phone that my kids had was a hand-me-down from me, and I don't own bricks. So all of a sudden, you're putting another burden on people to buy another set of devices, or an opportunity for civil disobedience, because I would say, fuck any of these rules, I'm doing what I want.
Sometimes one more.
I'm just wondering if you know where the tech companies sit on this, what their response is, because on the surface it might look like they would hate the idea and would lobby against the banning, but I would suggest on the other hand they're actually extremely excited and frothing at the mouth because they're going to gather a lot more data, and for them data is gold. So do we have a risk that the tech companies themselves are going to actually lobby for it?
Do you know the answer to that, Andrew?
I do in part, but I'm going to do my caveat really quickly again too. Don't speak for the tech companies, not speaking as the code today, right? So, but to answer your question, the way that I see it as Andrew Cushion, private citizen, the cost of doing this is very much on all of their minds because the technologies don't really exist, / have to be created, / have to be put in a single market jurisdiction landscape. Secondly, they have already got some adjacent similar solutions in place. Many of these platforms you can't sign up to a particular age in the first place. It's not necessarily 16, in most cases it's 13, but they are standing back and saying, we've already got ages, right? What we're actually talking about here is imposing a foreign solution on our technology stack in order to moderate how our customers can sign up and use that, and saying that you don't trust us to police that in the first place, right? So there's a lot of things going on there of the cost of complying, the monetary impacts of complying, the reputational and standards impacts of complying, that makes it difficult for many of them.
Yep, last question, go for it.
One of the things that Eric was talking about is that the difference between a child that's 12-year-old and a 16-year-old is that they've grown up, and you're presenting them all with the same level of ability. You're making a 16-year-old appear to be a 12-year-old and 8-year-old and putting a law right across them. The idea was that as they grow up, they can use more freedoms and learn how to use these things. And so putting a blanket rule down for a 16-year-old as 12-year-old is crazy, if you ask me. They need to learn, and that's what happens when you grow up. You learn. Did you want to speak about that? No.
That's a very good case for leaving it to parents to decide when their kids are ready for different apps.
Thank you. That concludes this section. Thank you, everybody.